Holmes and Stefan Gilmore, the last I saw, were standing side by side talking with each other.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And now there's videos and pictures of where Gilmore was like talking to Mahomes. And of course, after a game, even though there's, limited fans or no fans or whatever, like you're still fairly close. You're, chest to chest sometimes kind of talking in each other's ear just to hear over the ruckus and the commotion. So this is something, again, the league is being tested, and the players are being tested, and just the whole setup of a non-bubble situation. We've had bubbles in sports. The bubbles worked in sports. So that conversation comes into play.
Yes.
I don't know why the schedule makers, and you'll remember this, Sandy, because I think it happened for 2 years in the 90s, and I thought it was awful, but it was the 2 bye week scenario.
Yeah.
Why didn't the NFL schedule makers, because we all do the schedule release party in April, well, we were all locked down in April.
Yes.
If you're making an NFL schedule, and, I know at that time people's like, oh, we'll be done by summer. Oh, we'll be back to normal by July 4th. Like, none of that has happened. Why didn't the NFL schedule makers say, you know what, we're going to put 2 bye weeks in for every team?
Sure.
So if something like this happens, you can maneuver things, right? And you can make things work. There's talk of, okay, well, this team's, there's no positive test, and this team, there's no positive test, but the teams they're facing, so let's have them play against each other because they're going to play against each other later in the year.
Right.
I heard that tossed out for Bills Broncos, by the way, which isn't until, week 15 or whatever?
Right.
So we're all in this situation where everyone's scrambling with their pants down. And it's like, wait a second, you had months to prepare for this. And the NFL always, will break their arm patting themselves on the back about how great they've set everything up. And, okay, that's fine, but why are we dealing with this and to be such a scramble now when we're a month into the season and one team kind of started all of this in this situation? I'm not going to blame it all on Tennessee, but the NFL should have been more prepared in the way they were setting things up.
I've heard this. I'm not saying it's the whole reason, but if it's true, why is the NFL seemingly so reluctant to play regular season games in January? Well, we want to get the season done so the playoffs take place in January. What difference does it make? The Super Bowl, it's tough to move the Super Bowl, but you can take that extra week between the championship games and the Super Bowl and make it 1 week. That's not a problem. And play one more week or put one more bye into the schedule. So what if you're playing regular season games in January, as well as wild card and divisional playoff games and maybe even championship games?
Yeah,
what's wrong with that?
It's very curious the way this is all set up. We have to also look into testing. I know there was that one rash, what happened in like mid-August, was like, oh, we got a bunch of positive tests. Oh, wait, no, those are all bad tests.
Those are all false positives.
Those are all false positives. And then we have to look at the actual this is all shaky. This gets into a really large conversation, Sandy. I don't know if you want to go there or not, but like when the CDC's own website says a positive test may mean you have COVID-19, but it also may mean you had a cold in the last 3 years.
Right.
And then, the quick turnarounds for these positives. Where's the quality of our tests?
Yep.
Do we have the utmost, highest quality of tests available, not only to the players, but to the general public? I think that's much more important than, guys dealing with the football game. So, again, we can open up a big can of worms with this type of conversation, but it's a conversation that we all should be having, at least privately, at least within our communities, within our families. Like, how best do we approach this? We're not through it. It's not over. It's not done. We can talk about vaccinations and all what that means for everybody. Like, okay, this is a big conversation, and the NFL seems to be kind of screwing the pooch, for lack of a better term.
Hey, let's move on to some other subjects. There's always conversation about every year who's the first coach who's going to get fired during the course of the season. And I guess it could have been Bill O'Brien, but I don't know of a lot of people who thought it would be the guy who it turned out to be. In fact, that it was Bill O'Brien. And I guess I looked at it not so much in terms of Bill O'Brien being anything other than pretty much an average head coach and a very bad general manager, but I thought since he had both titles, maybe he gets fired at the end of the year, but not during the year because you've got to replace one man with two now. And the order, how do you do it? Do you take the GM part of O'Brien's job and fill that first and leave Romeo Crennel in place for the rest of the year as the interim coach? Or do you try for the coach first? Now we're already hearing Dabo Swinney's name bandied about, and he's had to deny questions about that possibility. But what about O'Brien being fired? Did it surprise you, shock you, or do neither of those things?
Yeah, I'm not going to say please me because you don't ever want anyone to lose their job, whatever is whatever. Right. But with Bill O'Brien, it's like something had to give because he was, well, there's several terms I could use. He was perhaps a little bit unhinged with the way that he dealt with his own players.
Yes, I think we speak to some of the same people on that.
Yes,
subject.
And I will say this. I'm not saying Deshaun Watson was doing cartwheels, but, he might be pretty excited about the prospect of a new head coach. And it's the general manager that failed the head coach. Is Bill O'Brien decent enough as head coach? Sure. Look at what he did in taking that team to the playoffs with the likes of Brock Osweiler. But he's a terrible GM. Rick Smith got them Deshaun Watson, and God bless Rick Smith. You know Rick. I know Rick.
Absolutely.
I mean, you talk about a great mind, a great football guy that was run out on a rail, basically, because Bill O'Brien didn't like him.
Right.
And Bill O'Brien wanted to go with, and this should always be remembered in the Bill O'Brien era, he wanted to go with Tom freaking Savage instead of drafting Deshaun Watson. And Rick Smith, then the GM, stood on the table. This is my guy. You're going to take him. And even remember Savage, Deshaun Watson got 0 first-team reps as a rookie in preseason.
Yes,
and Tom Savage goes out and wets the bed because he's awful.
The first game. Yeah.
And then Bill O'Brien puts Deshaun Watson and gets all the credit for that great young quarterback. And Rick Smith gets, he's moving on or whatever. I mean, we know what really happened in that situation. And so, my first thing is call up Rick Smith again. Seriously, that's not going to happen. But it is an interesting situation. It's all in NFL. It's like Game of Thrones. It's like, who do you trust? And obviously, the McNair family and Cal McNair lost the trust in Bill O'Brien. There's a couple of higher-ups in the Texans organization that O'Brien did not get along with.
Right.
So it wasn't only kind of like we saw with Josh McDaniels, right, Sandy? Interesting, comparisons.
Yeah, absolutely. Two former, one the current coordinator and a former coordinator. Yeah.
Right. And then they don't get along with certain people. So you can treat players a certain way, and there's some coaches that maybe need to treat players a little bit better, more even-handedly, but it's treating people within the organization. That can get you fired, and I believe that's what happened with Bill O'Brien. What Vegas have it, plus 2,500, whatever the number was? I thought it would be Adam Gase, honestly.
Yeah,
and,
I think most of us did. Yeah.
Bill O'Brien needed to be fired for the Texans to actually reach their further potential, and after that rough start, it became more of a reality, but you just didn't think it would happen because of, how embedded he was in that organization.
Absolutely. I want to ask you another question. What's going on? We know offense has been on the upswing, but this year more than ever, these are historic highs since the merger, at least in 1970, for the first month of the season, 51.3 points per game. Yep. Why is that? Because we thought 2 years ago when it was 48.1, boy, that's awfully high. That's 24 points a game for an average offense, and now it's more than 25.5.
Yeah, and here's what's very interesting. A couple of times on the Nick and Cecil show, we talked to George's Niang from the Utah Jazz.
Yeah.
And George has said that when you're in the zone, because it's a bubble and there's no fans, he said, when you're in a zone, you can stay in a zone, right? We're talking about Jamal Murray specifically when they're making their tear through the Jazz and then through the Clippers.
Right.
And George has told us, this is a guy getting it done at the highest level in the NBA. And he told us, when you're in the zone, you can stay in the zone because there's no fans to take you out of it.
Yeah.
So I really think that limited fans or no fans, an offense, you're in the zone, you can stay in the zone because there's not that opposition, there's not that will. And whether it's the 12th man, whether it's the guys at Mile High, of course, making their chance incomplete and all that, those fans make an impact because you're fighting not only the other 11 men on the field and the other 22 combined when you talk about starters, you're also fighting that 70,000 in the crowd. And when you don't have to do that, you can stay in the zone. So when George has told me that, Sandy, that's been my rinse repeat answer for this. When people ask, why is scoring up? Scoring's up because there's no fans, and offenses can get in a groove and stay in the groove.
And you spoke of being in the zone, and Garrett Bowles has, in fact, been in the GB zone as Denver's best offensive lineman. But the point on all the scoring has something to do with the absence of flags, 13.4 per game, and only 126 holding calls league-wide. And that includes those that are declined or those that offset. And fewer holding flags would always seem to be good news for Garrett Bowles.
Yeah. Well, and again, no fans means you can hear the snap count. You know, and the snap count. That's the one thing, we've always talked about it with offensive football. You get in the huddle, you create the snap count, you go up there, you run the snap count. Defenses don't know that. But if it's that ruckus crowd and you can't hear, it's like, what do you say? And then you're guessing, and then a guy can get the jump. The pass rushers are so good in the NFL. They just are. They're so quick off the line. The average snap to sack is less than 2.5 seconds.
Yep.
The average time before pass is 2.5 seconds. So pass rushers, if they can beat their man, they're getting home before that quarterback can pass, even if it's like, it's a quick pass, it's a screen, whatever, smoke route, whatever. Like, no. These pass rushers are so fast. They can get there before you can throw. So no crowds, less holding, less offensive linemen trying to guess if they heard something right for the snap count,
right,
and less defenders jumping that snap count. So, again, that kind of leads into the scoring. More sustained drives, more scoring, less holding. This is what we get.
This KKFN and KKFN HD1 Longmont, Denver. We're talking with Cecil Lammey, of course, and we'll get to the Broncos at the quarter poll. Looking at the team generally, what do you see apart from a team that even with the win on Thursday night probably has less than a 5% chance of making the playoffs?
Yeah, I see a team at this point that has not lost their will, which is good. That's a positive. I see a team that the lack of depth, and we said this, Sandy, we've been talking about this forever, hey, they have a nice 22. They even have a nice, let's say, 30 players. They don't have a nice 53. And when you've got so many injuries and you have to break into the rest of that 53, this is where those injury woes really get you because of lack of depth. What does lack of depth come from? Lack of drafting properly. What else? Lack of adding the right free agents. We go on and on and on about the draft failures and how it's looked a little better and how it could be better and all those sorts of things. I think we could go on and on about the free agent failures of this team and how that hasn't worked out, and that you're trying to fill holes, you're adding free agents, they're not working out. And kind of maybe under the radar, Sandy, is how during the Peyton era, free agents had a tendency to work out. Even guys like Emmanuel Sanders, who people will forget, when he came over from the Steelers, he never had a 100-yard game.
Yes.
In 4 years.
Right.
Not a 1,000-yard season. Never had a 100-yard game, and yet he became a Pro Bowl player. Yes, Manning, whatever was whatever, but they also had identified that talent, exactly what they needed, fit in that offense with Demaryius Thomas. So you got to hit on those type of things as well. So I see a team that still has heart, still has courage. The coach hasn't lost the locker room, anything like that. All that stuff could be coming. That's the danger. Because if you're not winning, and it'll be tough to get some wins with this upcoming schedule, if you're not winning, that's when the doubt, that's when the negativity can creep into your building.
Right.
It hasn't yet with the Broncos, but that's something we'll need to monitor and manage closely. They'll need to manage it closely because things can turn around pretty quickly where guys just aren't trying as hard because they're making business decisions. Well, I'm not going to be here next year. I don't like this coach or whatever the question marks may be. So right now, still got the heart, still got the will of the team. Hopefully they can get some W's to continue to build that goodwill.
Want to ask you before we let you run about two players.
Okay.
One has been a pleasant surprise, and the other has been, frankly, kind of an unpleasant disappointment so far. And I speak of the pleasant surprise being Josie Jewell, who had a great game the other night, 10 tackles, 2 sacks, already has as many solo tackles through 4 games as he had in 15 games a year ago. Big improvement seemingly for Josie Jewell. On the other end, few guards in the NFL, especially rookie guards, could have hoped to have the kind of year that Dalton Risner had in 2019. What has happened to Dalton Risner in 2020, and what has happened to Josie Jewell in 2020?
Yeah, Josie Jewell, and I pretty much made a public apology to Josie Jewell on Broncos TV this week because I was like, listen, I bag on him all the time. The guy can't cover. Yeah, he sure can tackle. He'd fit in the 90s, but he can't play in today's NFL. Well, that's wrong. And what he's done is worked on his quickness, worked on his speed. Now, coverage is still an issue with him. But when we talk about, finding the football, getting to the play, understanding, not taking those false steps. Football is a game of inches, but it's also a game of angles. And when you're taking those proper angles, when you're not taking false steps, there are so many times in a younger Josie Jewell career where he'd almost run himself out of a play. And the way he would do that is not because he was like super fast and overrunning the play, but he'd just run into the scrum. Run into all the blockers. They call that trash. You have to scrape and flow as a linebacker. His ability to scrape and flow this year is much, much better, so all credit goes to him. The Risner thing is interesting. I think we all should still have a healthy appreciation for Dalton Risner, smartest offensive lineman on the team.
Right.
I believe, and I will guess this, Sandy. Again, I believe in Dalton Risner, so I'm kind of guessing here, putting stuff together. But he covers for Garrett Bowles. Garrett Bowles, GB zone. Yes, that's fine. Risner does a lot of stuff to cover for that guy. When he's doing that and also has a rookie next to him.
Yes.
That's the difference, where he's damned if he does and damned if he doesn't, basically, because he's got to cover for the guy to his right. We knew Lloyd Cushenberry would struggle. Still a great pick, still upside, still a guy that, could be a center for 10 years for the Broncos. This is a rookie center. This is what you get. Risner have to cover for him on the right. Garrett Bowles is still Garrett Bowles for the most part. We can praise his play and his PFF numbers, blah, blah, blah. Yes, that's fine. But know that Dalton Risner still does things. They're not doing 3-man slide as much because you can't, like they did those last 5 games with Scangarello. And, oh, boy, how does this team miss Scangarello? Who would have thought that? But anyway, with Garrett Bowles, you're kind of still getting covered for him by Dalton Risner, who's also having to cover for Lloyd Cushenberry, and it puts himself on even more of an island. I don't believe I'm making excuses for Dalton Risner, but that's been my observations and charting plays for this team. Risner's kind of playing triple duty in a way.
Well, it's been an interesting first quarter of the season. We look forward to the second quarter, whatever it may or may not offer. Cecil, as always, our thanks. We appreciate it.
Be good, Sandy.
There he goes, Cecil Hemming. And, of course, Cecil comes to us each week. But, again, we remind you, he joins Nick Ferguson weeknights, Monday through Friday, between 7 and 10 here on The Fan. And you can read him at 1043thefan.com. It is interesting, and they aren't absolutely identical in terms of experience. Obviously, Josie Jewell is in his 3rd year now, and Dalton Risner is going into his 2nd. And, yes, there is probably still a certain amount of cover that Risner provides for Bowles, even more so with respect to Lloyd Cushenberry, who has really, really struggled. And we were talking about it earlier on. 48 pressures against this offensive line is number 2 in the league, and a good many of them have come over either center or the 2 guard spots. Quite a few have come over right tackle, not nearly as many over left tackle. And the guards, Glasgow's got to worry about the man to his right. Although I thought Dotson played a pretty steady game the other night. Maybe Dotson didn't need as much help as Wilkinson did. Dotson certainly seemed to play a better game than Wilkinson had over his first 3 starts this year. And then, of course, Glasgow to his left has Lloyd Cushenberry, and Risner with Bowles to his left and Cushenberry to his right. So maybe grading out the guards, has to be done with consideration given to the fact that they're both covering for guys on either side of them so far. But I think it's fair to say that Reisner's play has been mystifying, perhaps more than disappointing. And that Glasgow, I think, may be trying. He's played center before. He's played guard, obviously, before in the NFL. That he may be, at times, trying to play one position and cover for another and almost, in effect, play two positions at the same time. And that is always a difficult assignment. Adrian Dater, by the way, will join us at 11:30. So for those who were hoping we'd get a chance to talk in depth about what the Avs did at the draft yesterday, particularly with respect to the first-round pick they made, Justin Barron, the defenseman from Halifax, Nova Scotia, where you'll probably remember many other Avalanche skaters, including Nathan McKinnon, hail from that particular neighborhood, generally around the Halifax, Nova Scotia area. So he will have some people, not necessarily people he grew up with, but people he certainly knows about, joining his new team, the Colorado Avalanche. And, of course, we're assuming that he will play this next year again for Halifax. But from all indications, a pretty good selection. And the Avs did consider trading down. There were discussions about doing that. How deep those discussions were, well, that'll be one of the questions we will be posing to Adrian Dater in just a few moments. We talked about Josie Jewell having his best game as a pro on Thursday night. As a Denver Bronco, Melvin Gordon almost certainly had his best game, and he spoke with the media yesterday after practice and talked about doing something he has certainly done before, and that's playing against a Bill Belichick-coached defense. And, of course, Gordon will have his running mate back in the lineup this week as the Broncos are ready to give Phillip Lindsay some playing time once again come Sunday. Well, Noah Fant will be out this week. He is Denver's leading pass catcher so far this year. Of course, Cortland Sutton was expected to be Denver's leading receiver. He's on injured reserve, so you have two major playmakers out. You're getting Lindsay back. Who knows what Pat Shurmur will do, but if I could be so bold to suggest, I think he'd be crazy not to play them a lot at the same time, something that even before Lindsay got hurt, they really weren't doing. Now, I know the injury has a lot to do with this, but there have been 72 carries this year made by the combination of Gordon and Lindsay. Gordon has made 65, and Lindsay has carried the ball all of 7 times this year. And some of that we anticipated, and of course there was the injury that took Lindsay out of a couple of games. But considering these injuries, and considering the fact that it is most likely to be Brett Rippon at quarterback once again, he's, again, and in he, I mean Shurmur, going to be challenged to be maybe even more creative than he was against the Jets, and I thought he was a little more creative, had a more solid game calling plays, made use of Rippon's strengths. And generally speaking, there are a couple of bad spots in the fourth quarter, but stayed away from the weaknesses in Rippon's game. And I think having Gordon and Lindsey in the game at the same time will help the young quarterback, who at least on the Bronco depth chart was their third-string quarterback as recently as 2 weeks ago. O and I talked at length yesterday about our impressions of Gordon's performance so far this year through 4 games. He's on pace to do something that no Bronco running back has done in 16 years, going back to 2004 and Reuben Drones, and that's carry the ball at least 250 times. He is also on pace to gain more than 1,100 yards, and he is currently averaging 4.3 yards per carry. The fly in the ointment has been his production or lack thereof in the passing game. He has caught only 11 passes for 45 yards. You multiply by 4, and the end-of-season numbers look something like 44 catches for 180 yards and even fewer yards per carry than he would be averaging as a receiver by the end of the year, as opposed to his rushing endeavors, 4.1 yards per reception so far this year. Gordon's own thoughts on his performance so far. And, of course, Gordon knows that the pressure is on him even more heavily now with all of the injuries to the offense. And, of course, Melvin Gordon at this point is looking at working once again in tandem with Phillip Lindsay, and he talked a little bit more about that yesterday. That's Melvin Gordon talking about Sunday's game. And again, as I said at the outset of the show, we are talking about Sunday's game as if it will be played. Just as earlier, back in the spring, we were talking in terms of NBA season and NHL season resuming at some point. Those 2 seasons resuming, baseball starting at some point. We didn't always have a very good idea as to when or to how it would go, but we based our commentary on that supposition. And once again, as we discussed with Cecil a few minutes ago, and we've mentioned twice previously during the course of our show today, Adam Schefter of ESPN is reporting 2 new positive tests in Tennessee. That puts the game between the Bills and the Titans in jeopardy for Sunday, and perhaps almost as unlikely with Stefan Gilmore, the cornerback in New England, having tested positive. For now, putting the Patriots out of commission on the practice field. They will be gathering on a virtual basis today, but a virtual basis only, and that puts Sunday's Patriots-Broncos game in some jeopardy. Again, the incubation period can last for several days, and so Gilmore may or may not be the last Patriot to test positive during the course of the 5th week 2020 season. And again, as we said earlier, as a matter of fact, as far as we know at this point, no positive test today with the Chiefs, who played the Patriots on Monday night, though, as we mentioned with Cecil, and he discussed it at some length, you could see on one occasion, at least following the game, Patrick Mahomes chatting with Gilmore. Obviously, Gilmore had not tested positive at the time. He wouldn't have been on the field had he tested positive, but he has since tested positive. And if you've been touched by COVID in any way, you have to know about the testing procedures and that there can be false positives. There's a rapid test you can take that produces a result, but not necessarily as accurate as a test that would involve samples being studied over a period of days and then a diagnosis being made, either negative or positive, on the basis of having contracted COVID-19. We did hear a report earlier, and we believe, I think it was Maurice Hurst. Am I right about that, John? I think so. Maurice Hurst of the Raiders reportedly has tested positive for COVID-19. Now, the Raiders are set to play the Chiefs on Sunday, and perhaps based on the recent past, not looking forward to that game since they have been so thoroughly dominated by the Kansas City Chiefs in recent years. I believe in the last 4 games they've played head-to-head, that the Chiefs have outscored the Raiders something like 133 to 22. So there could be as many as 3 games in jeopardy, not being played on this particular Sunday. But, of course, we've talked about that a great deal. We will talk with Adrian Dater in just a few minutes as the Colorado Avalanche made their first-round selection in the position they were scheduled to select last night. They did not trade up. They did not trade down. They did not trade out of the first round. They took a player at 25 in the first round overall. And for the 3rd time in 4 years, that first-round Avalanche pick turns out to be a defenseman. And we'll talk about him next. Adrian Dater will be along in just a few seconds here. But before we get to Adrian, let me clean up the stat that actually one of our texters provided, that over the last 3 games between the Raiders and the Chiefs, the combined score, in fact, has been 103-22, and over the last 4 games, 143-55. So the 4-game stat involves an average score of 36-14 in favor of the Chiefs vis-a-vis the Raiders. In the last 3 games, 103-22. The scores have been 35-3, 28-10, 40-9. Raiders may just as soon postpone the game Sunday as play it, and obviously the COVID tests are not anything but very serious business, and Maurice Hurst has reportedly tested positive from the Raiders. So there are, I guess, as many as 3 games, or at least 3 games, in some jeopardy this weekend, including the Raiders and Chiefs, Broncos, Patriots, and Bills, Titans. Now, the outbreak has taken place in the camp of the Tennessee Titans, and you heard Cecil, through his own reporting, mention that contrary to recommendations that I'm sure were made to the Tennessee players, in the absence of being able to practice, and obviously they did not play this past weekend, they have been gathering in groups. And perhaps those groups have served as super spreaders, because once again, today, 2 new positive tests have been released by the Titans, which definitely puts the game between the Bills and Titans in great jeopardy. Perhaps to a lesser extent, Patriots-Broncos, with Newton, of course, in quarantine, and Stefan Gilmore testing positive. That news came through this morning as well. So we will see what happens, but again, we will operate until further notified. We will operate on the basis that the Broncos and Patriots will play on Sunday. The Patriots, of course, at 2-2, have outscored their opposition through 4 games by only 5 points. So the 2-2 record seems about right. 97-92 is the point totals that the Patriots have scored and allowed. 17th on offense, according to Football Outsiders DVOA metric. 23rd on defense, although I think the defense played quite well the other night for at least 3.5 quarters or so against the Kansas City Chiefs. Remember, it was a 13-10 game with just under 9 minutes to go on Monday night. The Patriots, usually better than average on special teams, far better than average, are a little bit better than average, and of course better than the Broncos on special teams, ranking 14th. The Broncos 30th on offense, 12th on defense, 21st on special teams, which isn't very good, but it's a heck of a lot better than dead last on special teams, which is where the Broncos were going into the Thursday night game last week against the New York Jets in the Meadowlands. So perhaps Brandon McManus's sensational place kicking has tilted things a little bit and at least made the Broncos respectable up to this point through 4 weeks on special teams. Again, the strength is clearly on the defensive side of the ball for Denver. The weakest unit so far through a month has been the offense. There are only 2 teams on the basis of efficiency that have been worse than Denver, and those 2 teams are the Philadelphia Eagles and the Giants. If you're asking, what about the Jets? Well, the Jets are 28th, one of the 5 worst offensive teams, but better than Denver. Let's get now to our Avalanche insider, Adrian Dater, who joins us now, and we'll be talking about last night and yesterday's draft with Adrian, our Avalanche insider from ColoradoHockeyNow.com, joining us to talk about the number 25 overall selection, Justin Barron, selected in last night's 2020 NHL Draft, and we'll be talking about free agency as well. Adrian joining us courtesy of Bud Light. And Adrian, for the third time in 4 years, the Avalanche take a defenseman in the first round, amid more talk this year that they might trade down with the pick. Why Justin Barron at 25 instead of perhaps trading down and getting more picks?
Well, Joe Sakic did talk about that last night, and he said they were close to either moving up a couple or moving back a few. Yeah. But in the end, they thought that Barron. Now, I think Joe may have misspoke in some ways when he said that Barron was the first defenseman available that they had first on their board. I don't think he would have been ahead of a couple of other guys that went in the top 10. It may have been after those top 10 that they were first on their board. But that's what he said. And he said, well, basically we just couldn't pass him up. So they took the pick. Justin Barron is, considered one of the best skaters for defensemen among his age groups in the world, I guess. And in the end, the Avs do have a tendency, Sakic especially, to want to err on the side of more surplus with defensemen. He thinks he can never have enough, and that's probably true. And that's why they took him.
That's probably true. And this is a guy who's 6'2" and 195 at the age of 18, so you would expect him perhaps to fill out a bit more. There was some talk about a blood clot issue that might have been a cause for concern, but Sakic didn't seem terribly bothered by that, did he?
No, I mean, it's a blood clot in his arm, and apparently he still has to do a little bit of waiting for that to, before he can sort of go full out with anything. But it's supposed to be only a couple more weeks that he can do that if there were a season, let's say. No, I mean, people have clots all the time. I mean, there's been a lot of players with blood clots and stuff, and you either take blood thinners or, in his case, though, he had a surgical procedure,
right,
to correct it in his arm, something to do with the muscles and everything, and it sounds fine. I mean, hey, I'm not downplaying a blood clot or anything, but I just don't think that'll be a big deal from what I've read. A lot of people have these. I remember Thomas Fleshman had a blood clot thing when he was in Av, and he played just fine.
Well, the Avalanche do have a few players, don't they, from that neighborhood? Halifax, Nova Scotia, including one guy whose name I'm kind of forgetting, but I think his initials are NM.
Yes, Nathan McKinnon you might be referring to. Nova Scotia, not probably still not the most famous hockey player from Nova Scotia.
No.
That might be his next door neighbor, Sidney Crosby.
Right.
But the Avs have a bunch of guys from Nova Scotia.
Yeah.
Ryan Graves.
Yeah.
We've got the Barron kid now, Nathan. I know I'm forgetting one or two here. Isn't Alex Newhook, I believe, the draft pick?
Yes, the draft pick.
So there you go.
Absolutely.
I guess they found a new piece of parcel of real estate in this world where they found fruitful.
Hockey players grow on trees up there, apparently. He made the Quebec Major Junior Hockey League All-Rookie team in 17-18, played in 68 games for Halifax in 18-19, producing 41 points. He only played 34 games this past year for the reasons we just discussed. And the scouting report says good size, excellent skating skills, strong forward and backward strides, solid puck retrievals, moves the puck well while finding the right options under pressure, great mobility with good gap control, pivots and angles opponents well, plays a physical game. I don't know that there's much else, and we're not
like,
suggesting that he's going to become Ray Bork, but that's a pretty good scouting
like
report. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no, it sounds good to me. I know that a guy named Cam Russell, who actually played briefly with the Avalanche, mostly with the Chicago Blackhawks in his career, but he's the GM of the Mooseheads, I believe, and he said, quote, he's a, quote, great hockey player.
Yeah.
And he's touting his own guy, but, boy, they really are high on him there. Everything was just sort of maybe pushed back a little bit with this blood clot thing, but before that he was considered, seems like in the top 15 of prospects overall out there, and the Avs. The Avs have had a lot of good recent luck with guys who slipped a little bit in drafts. This could be the latest guy.
And, of course, the Avalanche picking at 25. The two other defensemen, of course, they took in the last 4 years are taken in the top 5. And we know all about Cale Makar at this point. Bo Byram, I think, will be knowing quite a bit about very, very soon. Hey, I wanted to ask you about something that Gary Bettman indicated before the first pick was announced, focusing on a January 1st start for next season. It had been December 1st. Now it's January 1st. Does that seem more realistic to you?
I mean, what is realistic anymore? I mean, they're just sort of kicking the can down the road all the time, just hoping for some kind of vaccine, I think, that we can get fans back in the stands. I mean, that's the whole thing is, can they get fans back in the stands? Because the NHL maybe can muddle along a little while longer without fans in the stands and do this kind of bubble thing, but they just don't have the TV money and all the other stuff that can sustain them, maybe like football can, for a full regular season. It just can't happen. They just don't have the money. I mean, the owners could do it, but they're not going to do it. They're not going to fund a full 82-game season without fans. So, Sandy, I would say it's still very much uncertain when things are going to start. I mean,
yeah.
I think they can start January 1st with a bubble concept again.
Right.
For a couple weeks at a time, 3 or 4 teams come into cities, play 2 weeks of games, off they go to the next city. Denver, by the way, is heavily rumored to be one of those bubble cities if that happens, based on our pretty low COVID rates here and everything else. So, but the bottom line is, if March comes around again, let's say, and 2 months into their season and they don't have any fans, boy, they're going to, I don't know what the escrow rate. I know the escrow rate for this coming season, I believe, is 30% for players. I don't even want to see what the escrow rate would be if another season happens without fans. It might be 85, 90%.
Yeah. Well, that's obviously the most important question. But for fans, the most common question we get, and we're getting it again today, is the issue of free agency generally and how aggressive the Avalanche will be in pursuing a goaltender, given the fact that they finished last season with a third stringer between the pipes.
Right. Well, the latest that I've had, and I've been a little all over the map at times, but the last few days I've been pretty certain in my belief that they're not gonna go out and get anybody big. They think that and some of this is cap driven and economics, but they've got 2 goaltenders signed for next year at a total combined cap of about $5.2 million. And they are, clinging to the excuse that injuries got them and, it's just bad luck and how could that ever happen again in the playoffs? Well, it has happened 2 of the last 3 years, by the way.
Yes.
With their goaltending.
That's true.
So, to cavalierly dismiss it as bad luck is sort of going against what recent trends are showing. But that said, I don't think they're getting a big name goalie. They're going to stay with Gruby, I believe, and Frankie for another year. And if they stink or something or they get hurt, then maybe they do explore an emergency trade or something like that next season. But Joe Sakic even said last night that we don't have as much cap space as people think. We got to sign our own guys first, our own restricted free agents.
Absolutely.
That's not going to leave a lot of money really under the cap. Maybe we can get a guy here or there that's reasonable, but otherwise, cancel those visions of, Taylor Hall, Alex Petrangelo.
Oh, yeah.
Or, Marc-Andre Fleury coming over, in a deal where he's got a $7 million cap hit.
Right.
So,
right.
No, it just looks like it's going to be a quieter day on free agent day than some of us had thought first, or a lot of fans had hoped.
Well, even with a third-string goaltender, they were in a Game 7 in the conference semifinals. And I know that's not what they had in mind when they went into the bubble in Edmonton. They had greater aspirations, but it was still a pretty good effort. And I think we all agree that the best team won the Stanley Cup, the team that everybody thought would win last year, instead wins this year. And over the last 2 years, I don't think there's much doubt that Tampa has been the best team in the league, and they have one cup to show for it, and maybe a cup or two in store for the Avalanche in much the same way in the years ahead. Adrian, our thanks. As always, really appreciate it.
Thanks, Andy. Appreciate it. Thank you.
There he goes. Stay safe and healthy, Adrian. Our Avalanche insider, Adrian Dater, brought to you thanks to Bud Light, official beer sponsor of the Colorado Avalanche. And the point made by one of our texters on the RamosLaw.com text line regarding fans in indoor arenas. In particular, we hear about the NFL, certain teams allowing maybe 5,000, 5,500 fans in to watch games in 75,000-seat stadiums. Indoor arenas are super spreaders. As our texter from the 720 suggests, no fans until there is a vaccine. And I think particularly with hockey, and given the bubble sites that we saw identified this year in Edmonton and Toronto, Canadians in particular take this virus very, very seriously. And there will not be fans in any arenas, particularly Canadian arenas. And by the way, up in Canada, their infection rate, the death rate is much lower than it is here in the United States. But even up there, until there is a vaccine, there won't be fans. There may be bubble cities selected, and Denver, it seems to me, not measuring Denver against Canadian cities, particularly Edmonton and Toronto, but in relation to other American cities, Denver, perhaps Las Vegas, some of the sites that were mentioned, bandied about before the determination was made to play all the hockey games in Edmonton and in Toronto. Denver would seem to be a reasonably sensible choice if there are several bubble cities identified. And the whole concept of the bubble seems to have worked well for the NBA and the National Hockey League and other sports that have had this concept and haven't necessarily gone through it unscathed. In baseball, there were major problems early on, but they plowed on through it, and now baseball is on to its postseason. And by the way, we were talking about, in our few remaining minutes, I want to clarify this. We were talking earlier about playoff chances and about how in the AFC West, for example, Kansas City has a 99.5% chance of making the playoffs. And then you have to drop down to the Raiders at 27.3%, the Chargers at 5.6%, and the Broncos at 4.6%. We say that, of course, knowing that instead of 12 teams in the playoffs, as there have been in the past, there will be 14 teams that qualify out of 32 for the National Football League playoffs in 2020. And we know that there are, I believe, exactly 14 teams right now with 0 wins or 1 win across the NFL. At least one of those teams one of those 14 will probably make the playoffs. So if it's a 1 in 20 chance, a little bit less than a 1 in 20 chance, it's still a chance, and the number wouldn't be anywhere near 4.6% if only 12 teams qualified this year for the playoffs rather than 14. So at 1 in 3, maybe the calculation is a little bit different. This from the 360 on the idea of a bubble as it pertains to hockey. Vancouver, British Columbia makes the most sense. They had the Olympics there, so they have all those facilities and hotels to use. That's a good point. Of course, Vancouver's a beautiful city. I have not been there often, but I have been there within the last 40 years. And I think along with Edmonton and Toronto, Vancouver certainly would be a preferred site. The Jets, given Sam Darnold's shoulder injury, are reportedly looking at the possibility of starting Joe Flacco this week, as the Jets are scheduled to play at home against the Arizona Cardinals. So Joe Flacco, who is recovering from an injury sustained here last year, a neck injury that I suppose did for a time give Flacco some pause about continuing to play football. He, of course, knew he wouldn't be playing again for the Broncos. Hooked on with the Jets and may get a start this weekend. And to our 720 texter, you're very welcome. Reading the text just a few moments ago about fans in stands. And I think with respect to the NFL right now, I agree with something that Cecil said earlier on. These problems are quite possibly going to become more serious rather than less serious in the coming weeks. And we're hearing of isolated cases popping up, and this does conform to the forecast that was made by many experts that, at least in this country, the level of infection would rise in the fall as the weather turns colder and more people spend more time inside. And the whole subject of having fans back in the stands, even if there are games played, even if you start the NBA season sometime around the first of the year, the NHL season sometime around the first of the year, let's say you start the baseball season more or less on schedule next year. Won't speculate on football, but if there is football played on any level in the spring, I would have to think that we'd be very lucky by this time next year to have fans in the stands, whether it is Major League Baseball, Major League Hockey, Major League Basketball, or Major League Football that we're talking about. I think fans in the stands, in the numbers that we've become accustomed to seeing and being a part of, won't be a reality for at least another year. And even commissioners like Gary Bettman now are pushing back dates as to when their 2021 seasons will begin. 2020, 2021 will be simply 2021, at least with respect to the NHL and the NBA. Coming up here in about an hour and 15 minutes, Vaughn Miller will be joining Stokley and Zach. And for that reason, among others, we will bid you farewell for today. We'll see you tomorrow morning at 9, right back here on Sports Radio 104.3 The Fan.
And we are here. You don't have to think about it. It is right here. It is right now. Said you never know. How you doing today, Brandon Stokley?
Man, I'm doing great. Well, we got a Wednesday? Wednesday afternoon?
It is a Wednesday.
Wednesday afternoon. It's nice outside, hump day. I'm doing great. Got my hair cut today. So I'm looking fresh and clean, and
let us be the determining
what do you think?
Voice
Let me take
on
the hat
that.
off. Let me take the hat off. What do you think? What do you think?
Not bad.
Not bad.
Not bad.
Not bad. Look, she doesn't have a lot to work with, though. Okay, so she does as good as she can do. So shout out to Miranda. Thank you. Also, we got a fun little afternoon coming up after the show for us too.
We do.
So looking forward to that. Little sports trivia night and raise some money for organ transplants. Organ transplants.
Sure.
I'm sure I'm screwing that up, but raise some money for a great cause. And so it's going to be fun. Maybe hit around the golf ball for a little bit.
Yeah, maybe.
So it should be a great afternoon. I'm looking forward to the show. A lot going on, man. I just, I've been kind of running around, got some cookies, haircut, and then I'm looking like Stephen Gilmore, COVID-19.
Stefan Gilmore, Defensive Player of the Year. Steven's our producer.
Same, close enough. Stefan, close enough. I mean, VPH. I mean, come on, man. Like I said, I've been running around. I just looked down.
I thought you were on a good start when you got the day of the week right.
I felt good about that because I had got online and I was looking at the scores, the baseball scores from last night.
Yeah.
Because I didn't catch some of the endings of them.
Yeah.
And so I went back to Tuesday because I had to do the Tuesday when you do the scores, because it gives you the calendar.
Right.
And then I was looking at them like, well, wait, what is today? You don't want to screw that up. So
pretty fundamental thing.
Right. Sometimes you got to just take a step back. And I'm like, Monday Night Football was 2 nights ago. Okay, that was not last night. It's got to be Wednesday.
It is Wednesday.
It is.
It's
I'm looking forward to it.
We got a great show planned. Von Miller. How about that?
The Vonster.
The Vonster is going to join us in the 1 o'clock hour, not long after 1 o'clock, all right? Right about 1:10. And really looking forward to, seeing where Von's head's at. Obviously there was so much anticipation for Von personally for this year and a bounce-back season. He gets hurt in just this freak fashion. And now speculation about his future is front and center. I put out on Twitter, we're going to be joined by Von Miller. Put it on my Instagram. Hey, you got a question for Von?
The gram.
Go ahead and drop it.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. And, a couple people on Instagram, asked Von if he's played his last down as a Denver Bronco. Is, Von Miller going to, be here next year? Could they extend him? And all those questions are very much in bounds.
Yeah, no, that's not out of bounds. Look, I've been in those situations before, certainly not like Von, but, wait, are they going to release you? Are they going to not release you? You know where you're at as a player. I was in that situation with the Indianapolis Colts, realizing, I ripped my Achilles in December, had surgery. They go on to win the Super Bowl. Go figure. Once I got hurt, now, they hoisted the Lombardi Trophy.
You were a big part of that team.
I was a zero part of that team that year.
Well, because you got hurt in September. I'm telling you were there for 4 years.
Yeah. So, but I appreciate that. Anyway, but I knew at play here was the fact that I might be released. Okay? And certainly I would have been open to, hey, you want to restructure? You want to, whatever. I'm down for any of that, but there was none of that for me.
Yeah.
So it's very inbounds, and I think Von has thought about the potential of them coming to him with a restructure or possibly just an outright release. You just don't know because of the cap situation. That's the other thing at play. The cap probably will be going down quite a bit next year when it usually goes up every single year.
Right. So
now teams will have to make tough decisions. He got hurt. He hadn't played this year. He had a down year the year before. I think that's in bounds for sure and certainly in play here. And I think Von, if he's honest, has thought about that. How could you not if you're in his situation? He's not naive.
Right. No, of course.
He knows. He's a veteran football player. He's seen it happen to other guys.
Yeah.
He's seen it happen to Peyton Manning.
Right.
Where they asked him to restructure his last year of his contract and take a salary, take a hit, right? Take a little haircut like I got. So he knows the game.
He's probably actively talking about it with his agent. going over different options. Maybe they're even talking about it with the Denver Broncos.
Maybe so. Maybe so. I would say probably not yet. That's probably off-season business, and Broncos right now are more concerned with other business at hand. But you never know. You never know. You're right. You just never know. But I would think probably not right now. But certainly it could be a possibility.
You know, another question that I have for Vaughn is, like, you are now into your 30s. You're the franchise all-time sack leader. You've been to 8 Pro Bowls. You're on the all-decade team.
Mm-hmm.
You were the MVP of the Super Bowl. What's motivating you? Like,
I like it.
What do you think about when you're trying to push yourself in rehab? Like, what are you still trying to accomplish?
Yeah, I like that question. And if I had to speculate, I think it was his down year the year before. Like, that's what got him refocused this year. He realizes that 2019 wasn't good enough, and he's talked about it. And that kind of was his mindset this offseason. So I don't know, but I think that's a good question. And we get some good responses on the RamosLaw.com text line. I'm going to give a shout-out to the 217494. That's a really good one, but I'm not going to read it on air. I'm not reading it on air, but that's a good one. It made me laugh.
Can I read it?
Sure, go ahead.
Does Vaughn even like Stokley? Probably wants to shove an oxygen tank up his butt.
That oxygen bottle, yes, because I do joke about Vaughn grabbing the oxygen. Yeah. It's all in fun.
It's light. Yeah,
of course, Vaughn likes me. Was his teammate?
Right.
All my teammates
play
like
Bure.
me. Yeah. Come on.
The COVID situation, and we'll get to Vaughn. We'll get to Vaughn.
It's gonna be fun though.
Right,
it's gonna be fun to
to
check in with him, see where his head's at, see how he feels about this season. Hey, how do you feel about Vic? You know, I mean, I'll ask him that. How does he feel about Vic as his head coach? I mean, Vic's calling him out.
I like that. Yeah. COVID continues to be an issue here. This is kind of like realigned with what I thought it was going to be originally.
Yeah.
Like in the month of July when we were forecasting the season, it was this. But it went so good out of the gate in training camp and the first couple weeks of football that I was like, man, it's too good to be true. I stopped even thinking about COVID. No one was testing positive.
No, you forgot about it.
Thousands of people were tested every other day and didn't have a single hiccup, and now it's kind of coming hot and heavy here, and it directly affects the Denver Broncos. And their Week 5 opponent, the New England Patriots. New England Patriots cornerback and reigning and defending Defensive Player of the Year, Stefan Gilmore, has tested positive for COVID-19. League sources did confirm that to ESPN. And the team has canceled today's practice.
Wow.
This guy's a big deal for their defense.
Yeah.
He did not come off the field on one defensive snap against the Kansas City Chiefs on the makeup Monday Night Football game. Now, the Chiefs test all came back negative this morning, a source told ESPN's Dan Graziano. So let's just start there, Stoke.
Yeah.
How big of a deal is – how about just missing today's practice as the Patriots on a short week?
Obviously, Wednesdays are big deals. You install all your game plan stuff. I mean, this is the first day to get going for the Denver Broncos. I think with the way everything is structured and situated now with the Zoom and all this and that, they'll be probably doing that instead. Obviously, it's not quite the same. So I think, yes, the New England Patriots will be affected by this. How much? Not quite sure. It might be a benefit to them to have just another day off after their week last week, and the delay of the game. They flew in the day of the game, flew out that night. You're already on a short week. You weren't expecting that, a lot going on. You got one more day just to kind of rest and relax for a little bit. Might not be the worst thing for them. But obviously, going through something like this and not being able to game plan with your coaches in the building, then go out on the practice field and run some of these new plays that you have in, is not a positive for them. But I take another look at it and say the rest might be good for those guys.
Interesting. I didn't even think of that. Because I think Patriots, what do I think of when I think the New England Patriots? Attention to detail, really buttoned up operation. And when you lose, cheaters too.
Right.
But when you lose a day of addressing, who the Broncos are. Now, granted, not world beaters there to try to figure out. But at the
but they got like 4 quarterbacks that they have to prepare for.
It's
so
a deep
Bill
and
told us
talented
yesterday.
room. It's a deep
right.
and talented room.
And so they got a lot that they have to prepare for with all 4 guys possibly playing this week.
So, that's where my mind went. Like, you have a game in just a couple days. You're on a short week. Of course, this is a negative thing for New England. And you take a different look at it. I'm sure they're still meeting via Zoom.
But look,
doing all that
right.
stuff.
They're doing all that stuff. Look, you lose Stefan Gilmore. I mean, that's a huge deal, though. The guy's won the defensive MVP last year.
Yes.
That's pretty impressive, right? I mean, the best defensive player in the league. That guy's really good. They do a lot of things with him. And, they just kind of like, hey, I got that guy. All y'all just worry you can double team other guys because you got one guy that can pretty much take a guy out of the football game.
Yeah, you think of like the phrase lockdown corner.
Yes.
That's that guy.
That's him. And so you take him off the field. Obviously, it hurts him. Look, I don't think, like you said, when you're playing the Denver Broncos offense, there's not a lot to be scared of, though. So I wouldn't sit here and look at this and overreact and say, oh, my gosh, I think we're going to win this football game now. For me, it comes down to more of who's going to be their quarterback. Who's going to be their quarterback? That's what it comes down to for me. Stefan Gilmore, yes, okay. That's a little bonus for the Denver Broncos if he doesn't play, which if he just tested positive and he hadn't tested positive, I would assume that he's not going to play on Sunday no matter what.
Gilmore.
Stefan Gilmore.
Yeah,
right.
No, Gilmore's
unless
not
it's a
play.
false positive, or what do we call those, false positives, which we've seen.
Yeah.
We've seen the false positives pop up. We've seen it all the time. It happens. Unless it's that, he's not going to play.
Yeah, I can't imagine you're again, unless it's that. But
right.
If you're testing positive midweek, you're not playing on Sunday.
No, not going to happen.
So I was going to ask you what would be a bigger deal? Gilmore not playing or Cam not playing?
It's definitely Cam, right? I mean, I think we all will agree with that. The quarterback position. It's not like the Broncos have this high prolific passing offense that, oh my gosh, what are they going to do without Stefan Gilmore? That's not the case. It's the quarterback. It's Cam Newton, hands down. I mean, we saw that offense with B. Hoyer and Jay Stidham. Not very good, right? Not very good. I don't know, what happened to Josh McDaniels, and I thought he was just a brilliant offensive coordinator. I don't know what happened because it just didn't look very good out there.
It did not.
Right?
It did not.
I don't know what happened there. So that was confusing for me, but that's besides the point. But obviously the difference between Cam and those other 2 guys is, the Gulf of Mexico.
Yeah.
It's huge.
Yep.
It's huge. And Cam can do so many things that those guys can't do, obviously. But just when plays break down and you need him to go get 3 or 4 yards, he can do that. And their offense and the way it's structured, if you've watched them at all this year and how they're using Cam to run the football, misdirections and different things, they're being really creative with them, and it was working for them. So it's I don't think it's even a doubt, a question. There's nobody on that team that they could lose that has more value to them than Cam Newton right now. Nobody.
Well, we still don't know if Cam's going to play, but we know pretty definitively that the Patriots will be weaker this weekend without Stefan Gilmore, the Defensive Player of the Year. I mean, how many times does a cornerback win Defensive Player of the Year?
Not very much.
Doesn't happen a lot.
No.
I can't think of it. I mean, did Darrelle Revis win one? I maybe. I don't have it in front of me, but those usually go to pass rushers, guys getting to the quarterback, maybe stud linebackers like Brian Urlacher, Luke Kuechly that rack up 160 tackles or whatever. So, yeah, I'm
just hoping that they don't have a huge outbreak there.
Right.
They were just on the football field. They kept showing pictures after the game of him, Stefan Gilmore, talking to Patrick Mahomes.
I saw,
and the Chiefs had tested, and they're all come back negative or whatever, which is good news. But Patriots got on a plane, right? So he's around people. Hopefully they have their mask on. Hopefully they don't have a huge outbreak like we saw with the Titans. That's what I'm hoping. And then all of a sudden this game, what happens to this game at this point? Hopefully it's not a big outbreak. You have just him, and they can get it under control. And they caught it before it spread too much, and he's the only one that was infected. We saw Cam was infected, right? And they didn't have any positive tests after Cam, so
Right.
I'm sure it wasn't from Cam Newton that Stefan Gilmore got infected, but hopefully they don't have an outbreak there, kind of like we saw with the Titans.
Well, what's going on with the Titans here? There's 2 games where Las Vegas will not put a number on anything.
Oh, really?
It's the Broncos and the Patriots, and it's the Bills and the Tennessee Titans.
Wow.
And this morning, we found out that 2 Tennessee Titans players have tested positive for COVID-19. That's from
Season-long over-unders.
Mm.
Oh. What happens then? I mean, what happens then?
That's a good one. We saw in the NBA, they gave refunds across the board.
No, I know, but they're going to give these teams L's.
Oh, right.
This isn't going to be a game that's canceled.
Right.
They're going to give teams L's, and they're going to give teams W's that don't even play.
Right.
So that would be very interesting. That's a different topic for, I guess, a different show, but that's where my mind goes because
significant to some, as Brett Musburger once said.
Exactly. So we'll see how it goes. But obviously, look, if they feel like they didn't handle this the right way, I guess the commissioner could say, "Hey, that's an L for you, and that's a W for Buffalo or W for Pittsburgh, whichever team it is."
Could you imagine if the Patriots had widespread positive tests? You already have Cam. You have Stefan Gilmore.
Right.
They often say that, and I don't know all the ins and outs of this thing, so please don't hold my feet to the fire. But I have heard, hey, there's an incubation period where you can test negative, and then